Okay, so this week we are doing Latin America. I'm going to break up the lecture into two parts because there's about 50 slides, so that's a lot to do in one sitting. So I will post the first part of lecture today and the next part of lecture in 2 days. All right, so this region is huge. It's vast. It goes all the way from the American southern border to the very bottom tip of South America, where you might, if you want to go to Antarctica on a cruise, you would probably go from that little tip of South America straight over to the peninsula that was in the documentary. Our focus this week, we're returning to something we've talked about before. It's called sustainable development. If you don't remember that term, go ahead, take a moment, look it up. But essentially, it means that you are doing economic development that does not deplete the natural resources like a rainforest for future generations. We still have quite a few people, or a couple, handful of people who haven't turned in their current event yet. If you're scheduled for this week or next week, go ahead and turn it in then. If you have forgotten to turn in your current event, get on it. Don't miss those points. There's a drop box. Turn it in. Your next map quiz is posted, and I'll talk about that in just a second. All right. So this is the region we're talking about, and if you see, there's subregions. So some people consider Mexico to be part of North America. The book and a lot of geographers and scholars really consider it part of Latin America because it shares a cultural colonial history with the rest of the region. Well, so having, I have too many cats. Okay, get off. Here you go. Okay, so it shares a colonial history of having been colonized by the Spanish or the Portuguese, and they also share Mexico, Central America, Caribbean, and South America share language and the religion of Catholicism. So typically we kind of think of Mexico and then Central America right through here as one region, from Panama to Mexico. The Caribbean, it's in the Caribbean Sea, these islands over here, and then South America is this big chunk. All right, map quiz. So I'll go over these in lecture, but you're going to need to be able to label. Hold on. What are you doing? All right, sorry. You need to be able to label the Andes Mountains, the Sierra Madres Mountains, the Amazon Rainforest, the Rio Grande River, the Caribbean Sea, the Tierra del Fuego, and then the two countries that are considered the power players, the big economic and political power players, Mexico and Brazil. So here's where these are located on a map, and you're supposed to label them. If you look over here, you can draw if you want. So here's Mexico, and then Brazil is over here. The Andes Mountains they're in South America, and they go all the way down, and you want them to be on the west side. So that's crazy distracting. Whatever's going on here is very distracting. Just leave the door open. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So we have Mexico here. Brazil is here. The Andes Mountains are on the west side here. The Sierra Madres are the main mountain range in Mexico. So just put them right in the middle of Mexico. Amazon rainforest, it's huge. It's in Brazil. Put it further in the center of the country because it borders all these other countries as well. Amazon rainforest. The Rio Grande River. I believe I told you guys I'd never make you label a river, but the Rio Grande's really important and it's not that hard to find. So the Rio Grande is important because it forms a lot of the border of the U.S. and Mexico. So all you really have to do is find the U.S., find Texas right here. Here's the Rio Grande. The big river in Spanish. The Caribbean Sea is over here. Keep it here because otherwise over here this is the Gulf of Mexico, so the Caribbean Sea. And then last but not least, the Tierra del Fuego, which is the the southernmost tip of the continent. All right, and we'll go over that in the next couple lectures as well. All right, pretty self-explanatory here. So today we're going to focus a lot on the physical geography of the region. The region really stretches from, again, the border with the United States at the Rio Grande, all the way down to that Tierra del Fuego. Latin America is the region name, and that's based off of languages. So Latin languages, which are sometimes called Romance languages, so Spanish, Portuguese. And then there's subregions, so Mexico and Central America. Then we have the Caribbean as its own subregion, and then South America. All right, the Sierra Madre. Hang on, sorry. There's an oriental, which means the eastern coast, and an occidental, which is the western side of it. And then Mexico City and a lot of the cities and the farms and everything are all in the middle because you can't really have a big city or farms in mountains. And so this creates a really big issue with pollution. So Mexico City is considered one of the most polluted cities in the world. That's because the pollution can't escape the mountains. All right, here are the Andes again. There's lots. This is a very, very mountainous region. So we have the Andes Mountains are just in South America, but there's also, just like we said, the Sierra Madres in Mexico, and then volcanic mountains throughout the Caribbean islands and Central America as well. Andes Mountains, the world's longest mountain range, goes down the entirety of the continent. Then we also see on your map quiz, here's the Amazon rainforest. The Tierra del Fuego. So again, it's the southern tip. It's semi-Arctic, so it's going to be a little bit in the colder temperature. It's known for having really great marine, so sea life, like these big sea lions here. And it's a tourist destination because it's kind of the end of the world, or the taking off point to get to Antarctica. The west coast of this region is on the Ring of Fire, so that leads to countries like Chile having quite a bit of earthquakes. Same thing with Mexico. And then the Caribbean basin itself is its own little mini tectonic plate, so there's a lot of earthquakes in the Caribbean, including one in the country of Haiti that was devastating. Here, go ahead and watch a little video. Watch this video about the earthquake in Haiti and how it's trying to make a comeback. Haiti's considered one of the world's poorest countries, and the earthquake there was considered the worst natural disaster in the Western Hemisphere, with over 200,000 people dying. In addition, with the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific and the Atlantic, this region is home to a lot of tropical storms, especially hurricanes in the Gulf. One big example that happened in the United States was Hurricane Maria that happened in Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States. Donald Trump is their president. They are Americans. So here's another time where you should stop and watch this little video about Puerto Rico trying to get back to normal after the Hurricane Maria. All right. So when we studied North Africa and Southwest Asia, they did not have a lot of fresh water. That is not as big of a concern in this region. They have several big freshwater rivers. The most well-known is probably the Amazon. So it starts here, and it just has all these little what we call tributaries. There's branches out. There's another river in a tropical rainforest further north called the Orinoco. Down by Argentina, there's the Rio de la Plata. And then, again, on your map quiz, the Rio Grande. So it says here, it's about 325 feet across. And as you can see, it makes up a lot of the border. Not the whole border between the U.S. and Mexico, but quite a bit of it. So lots of freshwater systems that greatly impact the landscape and the ecosystems. Speaking of climate and vegetation, so we might really, think of this region as just being like, oh, it's always hot there, it's always tropical there. There's tons of diversity. This is a huge region that is marked by giant mountain ranges. There is the world's driest desert, so the desert that receives the least amount of rainfall. It's called the Atacama Desert. It's in the Andes, or it's right here. Here's a photo of it. Of course, there is rainforest, and not just in the Amazon, but throughout the Caribbean, throughout Central America. This is a region that a lot of it is in the tropics. So, just like with Southwest Asia, when we studied the Mekong, or Central Africa, or places like in India, South Asia, there is tropical rainforest here. There's also kind of lesser known, there's savanna or grassland. So places like Argentina down here, they have grasslands that look kind of like, Nebraska or Kansas. And they do a lot of cow farming there too, cattle ranching as well. They have cowboys down there, and I've traveled to Argentina. They love cow. They love eating cow. They might be as big on it as we are in the USA. And then in Mexico, it kind of varies, So there's colder temperatures, there's warmer temperatures, there's more mild temperatures by the ocean. So lots of diversity in terms of climate and vegetation. All right, so this video is a little kiddie, but if you're bored and you kind of want to chill out for a moment, this is a very relaxing tour of the Amazon rainforest. Speaking of, last week I heard that some of the indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest, who are considered some of the most closed off humans on the planet, no interactions with the outside world, COVID-19 is emerging in some of the Amazonian tribes, and we don't want them to be wiped out because A, they're humans, and B, they give us an example of how people live without technology. All right. Amazon is huge. So look, it's almost the size of the United States. And it is in Brazil, but it's also in a bunch of other countries too. So it's in Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, maybe a couple countries that you're less familiar with, like French Guiana, Suriname, regular Guyana, sorry, and Peru, Bolivia. So it really does stretch out. With deforestation, and we'll talk about this more later, it's getting smaller and smaller because Brazil's a big country with a large population. People are moving in, or they want to farm on that area, or just like when we talked about Southeast Asia, they want to develop it so that they can, have jobs, but that's not great because it can tear down a very important ecosystem. All right. So yes, much of this region does fall within the tropics, which is a place from these lines of latitude, the Tropic of Cancer in the north, then the equator, and then down to the Tropic of Capricorn. So we studied the rainforests of Southeast Asia. If you remember, we talked about the Mekong River and all the cool animals that emerged from that. There's also significant ones in South America, obviously, but also Africa. So it's hard to balance economic development, giving people a quality of life, and giving them access to jobs and to resources, while also being sustainable and not destroying the rainforest. So why do we even care about rainforests? What's the point? And let's just take a moment. I want you to think in your brains, why do we care about trees and rainforests? Who cares? Tear down them trees. Not so fast. Don't do it. So there's people there, first of all, and that's their homes. They're also what are called carbon sinks. So they absorb all the nasty carbon that we put into the air. Maybe less so now with COVID, but like when we fly on airplanes and drive and all that, and industrial, using with businesses. They help regulate the water cycle. The more rainforests we have, the more chill our oceans are going to be. There's going to be less devastating tropical storms. Hugely important, they're the lungs of the earth. They give us oxygen. So rainforests give us 40% of the world's oxygen. We need that. Also, hugely biodiverse. So biodiversity, it means a lot of different plants, animals, insects, species. So more than 50%, so more than half of terrestrial biodiversity. So terrestrial means land. So more than half of the world's land creatures, things live in the rainforest. And then if you just want to do it for selfish reasons, it is the nature's pharmacy. So 70% of anti-cancer drugs come from the rainforest, and that's just one. There's tons of other. It says it yields more than 25% of Western medicine. So we owe a lot to the rainforest. Now, I want you to take a moment and go to page 325, table 10.3, and look at, also use your own ideas. Why might people want to increase agriculture or commercial development in the Amazon? And then what can we do to improve the Amazon and the well-being of its citizens without depleting the rainforest? So people need to work. We get that. Development is a thing that needs to happen in some cases for people to live a better life. But what are some forms of sustainable ways? And we talked about it again in Southeast Asia, but what are some sustainable ways that we can improve the rainforest? Or sorry, not improve it, but maintain the rainforest while improving people's lives. All right, take a moment, stretch it out. Now let's talk about cultural diversity. This region is kind of considered the other melting pot. In the United States, we consider ourselves a melting pot of ethnic groups, very diverse in terms of where people come from to the United States. Well, a lot of the same drivers that made the United States a melting pot also existed in this region, in Central America and the Caribbean and South America. So they had, and still do have, a large native population. We'll talk about more in a couple of days that a lot of the indigenous populations were, a lot of people were killed during colonization, but a lot of them also intermarried or had forced marriages with Europeans. So there are still significant large native populations in certain regions like the Andes. The Atlantic slave trade brought, the forced migration of many Africans into Latin America to work. And then especially in places like Brazil, in Haiti, there is a significant African population. European immigration, we know about Spain, we know about Portugal, but also people came from Italy, they came from Scotland, they came from all over. And that really began in the late 1400s, in 1492. In 1492, remember Christopher Columbus, he came over from Europe. But that immigration didn't just, wasn't just in the 1500s and it stopped. There's still currently people that move from Europe into Central and Latin America. And then a group we don't talk about as much are Asians. So just like people from China and Japan and Korea came over to the United States to find a better life, they moved into places like Peru or, all over the region as workers. And then many people settled there. So here's some people of Asian descent celebrating a Brazilian match, some farmers of African descent. So just a lot of diversity in terms of ethnic groups and races. How it breaks down, it's kind of hard because it's not hard, it's just different than what the racial categories in Latin America don't exactly line up to racial categories in the United States. They have different names, but basically people that consider themselves 100% of native descent are about 30% of the population. People that consider themselves only of European descent is about 9 to 10% of the population. And then people that are considered mestizos, so their ancestry is multiracial. So you might be African, Asian, indigenous, etc. And then there is, some people prefer to be called Latino. Some people prefer to be called Hispanic. And here are two interesting, these are from BuzzFeed and MTV, of whether or not to call someone Latino or Hispanic. And if you're comfortable, this is also a conversation you could have with one of your Latino or Hispanic friends. Ask them what they prefer. Generally, it seems like there's a move away from Hispanic because it just focuses on Spanish. And, if you're Portuguese or if you're, from Belize, if you're Brazilian, you speak Portuguese. If you're from Belize, you speak English, or maybe you speak an indigenous language. So, and then here's some example of the ethnic diversity. We have someone that's, a little bit more of African descent. This happy-go-lucky looking guy, Latino. This is a person of an Amazonian tribe. This is more of the indigenous, what I guess indigenous people look like. This is a woman in Bolivia. And then this guy is Tom Brady. He is not Latin American, but his supermodel wife, Giselle, is Brazilian. 1 second. Tony, what do you need, baby? Are you bored? Addie, will you play with Tony or give him a head scratch or something? Just make him not whine. Oh, thank you. I love you guys. Shh. Religious beliefs. Super Catholic. They just had Easter. Big deal for all Christians. But for Catholics, it's one of the biggest holidays. I guess it is for Christians too. Anyway, but another big deal is that the Pope, for the first time ever, they have a South American Pope. He is from Argentina. Pope Francis, a lot of people think of him as kind of more liberal, more youthful, more fun. I mean, not youthful looking, but he's into he is the youth like him. And it's a very Catholic. So if you look at this world religion maps, Mexico is 90%, Peru is 90% or more, 80 to 90%. So a lot of Catholic, and then 20% Protestant. And then there's smaller pockets of other religions as well, but pretty Christian altogether. And then, Christianity breaks down into Catholic and Protestant, pretty overwhelmingly Catholic in this region. Languages. I'm not going to really go over this slide. Oh, actually, yes, I am. So one thing we think of this region as being very Spanish speaking or Portuguese speaking in Brazil, but there's French in places like Haiti, Martinique. English is the primary language in many countries. A lot of people in this region are bilingual. They might speak Spanish and English, or they might speak a native language in English. And that's another thing that's really cool, is that a lot of native languages are still spoken in this region. So Nahuatl, the Aztec family of languages, is still spoken in places like Mexico. And if you zoom in on this on your own, it will say if they have an official language like Brazil, pretty cut and dry. There's Portuguese, but Mexico, Spanish is de facto, but 62 recognized indigenous regional languages. Pretty cool. I highly recommend you going into the comments if you can. And these are just actually, I don't know if we can do this on our own. Let's see. Let me try to see if I can open this up without destroying everything. Yeah, it's pretty cool, I think. So 12 words the English language owes to the Aztecs. Now, we'll talk about the Aztecs more in a couple days, but the Aztecs were the indigenous. So again, the word indigenous means the native people, the people there before the Europeans came. In the United States, we call them Native Americans. In Canada, they're called the First Nations people. When we talked about Australia, they were called the Aborigines. And in New Zealand, they're called the Maoris, Maori. There's so many different ones in this region, but one of the most famous is the Aztecs. And that's where a lot of people have a history of being Aztec and Spanish descent. All right, so there's about 1.5 million people that still speak the Aztec language. And here are a couple words in our language from that. Avocado, guacamole, cacao and chocolate. Yummy. Mole, if you've had mole sauce, amazing. Chile, we use that word quite a bit. Chia, like chia seeds, chia pets, superfood. Coyotes, yay. If you are older, mezcal, it's tequila, it's like delicious tequila. Peyote. Shack, the term shack, like for an actual shack. Tomato. And that's all. There's another link to another one if you want to check out more, but yeah. Cool. All right, population patterns. The population of this region is growing, and it's creating stress on the physical environment, just like it is everywhere. So the population only lives on about 1/3 of the land available. Think about what might be some limitations to where people live. The answer would be things like mountains. Don't want to live way high up in the mountains. It's dangerous, it's cold, it's pretty impossible to get things up and down. The Amazon rainforest, volcanic mountains, and then deserts too. So we see a lot of people up here between South America and Central America, a lot of people on the east coast of Brazil from old colonial ports. In the Caribbean, a lot of little mini islands, so people just kind of live wherever they can. And then again in Mexico, you see, so the Sierra Madres are here where it's less populated, and then the people are all kind of crowded in what's called the Mexican Plateau. Just like a couple other places we talked about, like India or South Asia, really, Southeast Asia as well, places like Thailand and Vietnam. This region is having rapid urbanization. So what we mean by rapid urbanization, people are moving en masse into the cities, like fast, a lot of people at once. This happened in the United States and Europe during the Industrial Revolution. But so in the late 1700s into the 1800s. In Latin America, it happened a little bit later. It's been happening, more recently. So this is leading to the existence of megacities. Megacities are pretty new. It means, newer to like the 20th century, late 20th century. And it means 10 million or more people in one city. So in Brazil, one of the cities, Sao Paulo, 20 million people. Mexico City historically has been one of the world's largest at almost 20 million. Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, 13.6. Here's Buenos Aires here. Rio de Janeiro in Brazil down here with, speaking of Christ the Redeemer statue. Rio is 12 million. And then ones that in 5 years are going to be that big. Lima, the capital of Peru. Bogota, the capital of Colombia. And Santiago, the capital of Chile. All right, hang in here for a couple more slides. All right. I'm sitting at my window and so many people are walking their adorable dogs. Wish I could go up and kiss them, the dogs. Anyway, okay. Urban pressures, Mexico and Brazil. So, what are some of the concerns about rapid urbanization in Mexico and Brazil? So, looking at page 324 to 325 for help. And then if people can't find affordable housing, why is this a problem? So I want you guys to actually take a moment, do this, write it down, because this is a huge, huge issue. And then write down a couple ideas of why this might be an issue. If you move into a big city with everybody else, if the population of Kansas City grew by 50%, so 200,000 more people moved in, or 300,000 people moved in within a couple years, what are some issues? Where are people going to work? Where are they going to live? If you can't find work, what do you do? Who's going to pick up your garbage? If there is no garbage pickup, what happens? If there's not schools, why is that a problem? So yeah, there's a lot of issues with that. So just take a moment and come up with some answers. And they will be on the next slide. So one thing is air pollution. So Mexico City has the worst air quality in the world. And they discourage kids from playing outside. The air quality is so bad. And then another thing is slums or shanty towns. Slums are kind of the mean word for it. Favelas is the specific to Brazil word. And then some people call it informal housing because people are just trying to survive. They're living where they can. A lot of these informal housing, informal neighborhoods are built in some of the crummiest places. So like, let's say on the side of a hill that often has mudslides, or up in the mountains. And that's a huge issue because if there is a disaster, that's not a stable place to have your home. It could lead to a lot of issues all at once. As you can see from this picture, they're super crowded. So if there was a fire, how would the fire department get in? How are you supposed to drive to get building materials in and out? So yeah, so a lot of concerns over rapid urbanization. So people don't have places to live. And if you look at this, this is nuts. All right, so this is how many families are homeless or live in poor quality houses. So what percentage of families are homeless or live in poor quality houses? Houses without running water, for example. Some places like Nicaragua, 78%. Peru, 72%. Bolivia, 75%. So 3/4 of people are homeless or live in bad quality homes. Some of the wealthier countries in this region, like Costa Rica, only 18%, but that's still a lot. Chile is one of the wealthier countries, 23%. Same thing with Argentina and Uruguay. But a lot of the places are in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and that's a lot of people that are vulnerable to natural disasters, that don't have access to water, clean water, that could make them, more likely to get a disease. So they're trying to come up with solutions. And one of them has, and this isn't just in this region, but as a way to spur investment, people have tried to get big events to come to their place, to their country. So an example might be the World Cup or the Olympics. And in Brazil, they were hoping that the Olympics would lead to shining a light on the favelas and also to development of the favelas so they can be what are called sustainable slums. So slums that, just because you live in low-income housing doesn't mean it has to be badly developed, badly built. Doesn't mean that it can't have water and things like that. So watch this video. It's pretty cool, and it's about some of the hopes and broken promises, really, about developing the favelas for the Olympics. Another kind of controversial way to get another kind of controversial thing is called a slum tour. So slum tours, they happen here's in Southern Africa or India. In this picture, I went to one in Buenos Aires. Basically, you pay money and you go and visit the slum. You get to tour it. Here's a video, and some people call it, as this thing says, human safari. So watch the video and think of some of the pros and then some of the cons of slum tours. But definitely watch the video. It's very interesting. All right. So what's really cool is that people are starting to rethink slums. They say necessity is the mother of invention, which means if you have little, you're going to be very creative. So people that live in informal houses, be it in South Africa or Vietnam or in Brazil, they don't have a lot of building materials, so they reuse things. They reuse plastic, they reuse tires, and they utilize things like the breeze from the ocean in the previous video as a way to cool things, or cool things in the summertime. So instead of people in the north, like in the United States and Europe, saying, oh, let me tell you guys how to fix your cities, we're actually learning in the United States how to be more sustainable by learning from people that live in the slums that have become more sustainable because they have to be. So this is this really cool book called Radical Cities, and it says, I realized that the formal city, so think like New York City, couldn't survive without the informal city, without slums. In the slums, I discovered a whole new social geography. I began rethinking my whole profession, he's an urban geographer, unlearning what I learned, and then refocused on adaptation and reuse and using scarcity as a resource. Some of us might be doing that right now with the coronavirus, like, oh, I am not going to waste any of my food because I can't. Or, you learn to make do with what you have. And then here are a couple really super interesting articles and videos about rethinking slums. And here's an example of sustainable slums. I believe this is it says Ecuador right there. So, they have parks within the slums, and, basically they're not slums. They're low income housing. There's not enough housing for people. That's why people don't want to live in a favela. They want to live in a place that's clean, that has a good school. People want their kids to do well. They want their families to, be healthy and happy. So these are low income housing that are sustainable and affordable. All right. Good job, everybody. Next class, we're going to finish this lecture, talk about history of the region and immigration. Also, if you'll notice, I posted your final project. I'll talk about that more in a week. But if you want to get a jump start, that's there. And your map quiz is due, Sunday? Due on Sunday. All right. Miss you guys. Have a good one.